Welcome everybody to the launch of our Future Talent Insights report for 2020. Our Apprentice Insights report for 2020. Our report is produced in two parts, which we've joined together for today's webinar. So we'll be talking through top-level highlights with more information being available in the report. So following on from today's session, we'll send out sort of both parts of the report for you to read through. We'll also aim to have time for questions at the end. But if we do run short, we're obviously happy to speak with you further on a one-to-one basis. So what we'd like to do is start off today with just some introductions. So I'll introduce myself. My name is Carlin Summers. I have been working with Amberjack for almost 4 years now. I started with Amberjack as a client partner and supported our clients with the day-to-day delivery of their campaigns. But then before moving over to the consulting solutions team. So I work really closely with organisations to understand where their challenges lie and bring together subject matter experts within Amberjack to put together solutions that address not only today's challenges, but are also aligned with future strategic goals for organisations. So joining me today, I've got Kate Buchanan. I'll let you introduce yourself, Kate.
Hi everyone, thanks very much for joining today's webinar. We're very excited to share our insights report and some of the analysis and recommendations. My role at Amberjack is Client Solutions Director. I've been with the organisation for 9.5 years or so, and very much like Carlin, joined from that sort of delivery point of view for running those early careers programs, and more recently have been working with organisations, as Carlin says, to really get under the skin of the challenges, aims, objectives, what it is you're trying to achieve now and into the future, to put those sustainable solutions in place and help you differentiate from those in the industry. So yeah, you're very welcome. I hope you find the session useful today.
That's great. Thanks so much, Kate. So we were actually due today to be joined by Tristram Hooley, who's the Chief Research Officer for the ISC. Unfortunately, Tristram's had to attend a private matter, so he won't be able to join the webinar today. We do have a couple of slides at the end that I'll speak about in terms of some recent research the ISC have completed. So that's there if you are interested in learning a little bit more about their work. So on to kind of the overview of today. So as I mentioned, we've been supporting clients with their apprentice recruitment for many years, but this is the first time we've actually published a report on the trends and activity within this specific subset of future talent. So we're excited to share our helpful and powerful insights to enable you to benchmark your current processes and really plan for ongoing improvements. For those we've not met before, we'll start today with obviously a fuller introduction to Amberjack as a whole. We'll then take you through part 1 of our research, which describes insights which are gained from analysis of actual applicant data. So that's across Amberjack's combined client set. Part 2 of the report then shares the results of a survey that was completed by organisations that are not just Amberjack clients, but also non-clients. So as mentioned, I'll speak a little bit about some of the ISC's recent research, and then we'll go on to answer any questions you have. So feel free to ask the questions as we go along, and we'll absolutely endeavour to answer them at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, let's get started. There are many of you on the webinar today who do know us, but for those of you who don't, Amberjack are future talent experts. So it's absolutely what we live and breathe on a daily basis, and fundamentally it's sort of forms our DNA. So at Amberjack, we're renowned for our tech-led innovation and innovative approach to future talent recruitment. We've got many facets to our service offering, which include, but absolutely not limited to, RPO, assessment, design and delivery, attraction and onboarding. And all of those are really underpinned by our amazing suite of technology platforms. So we're also really proud of the number of awards that we've received over the years, both as an individual provider, but also in partnership with our clients. So it really goes to show sort of what can be achieved through true partnerships. And it's absolutely the way that we approach any kind of relationship that we have. Speaking of our clients, we've got on the screen there a selection of some of the clients that we're lucky enough to call our partners. We work with organisations of all sizes across a really, really broad range of markets. So for that, which effectively means that we have no two clients that are the same, which is really brilliant. Throughout the day, we'll be covering lots of aspects of the recruitment life cycle. If there's anything that you'd like to speak to us more about in further detail, please don't hesitate to get in touch. So on to Insights Part 1. We wrote our report in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic with data that was actually captured prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. So the recommendations that we've made are what we think will be kind of what the hashtag new normal post-crisis world will look like. It's looking to be an inevitability that we will be in a recession for a while. And so throughout today, we'll be looking at some of the data through that lens. I wanted to start today by just running a short poll, which I'm hoping will work. We've never done this before. So if I go in to launch that, hopefully, this will work. There we go. So if I could get you guys just to vote on that, it should show up in your little sort of panel screen thing on the side. There we go. I've got a couple of people that are doing that. So we just wanted to know kind of what percentage of your recruitment features your apprentices at the moment. So we're looking at kind of 50% are sitting at around 10 to 25%, 33 are about 25 to 50, and about 15 are kind of above that 50%. Small amount of 3% sitting at 75 to 100%, which is brilliant. I'll move on just while people are kind of responding to that. And we'll move on to the next slide. So I wanted to start off today by looking at some application to hire ratios. So it's worth noting here that all of the organisations who participated in the research are larger organisations with well-established programmes, budgets and team sizes to go alongside that. That means the ratios are more in line with graduate programmes, just by the nature of how they kind of approach the recruitment processes. So the picture may look slightly different for smaller organisations who are on the session today, where your recruitment model relies more heavily on kind of training provider sourcing. But it's always the case, certainly when you dig into the figures, that when things effectively that's kind of when things become interesting for us. So we've collected data across a wide variety of functions. As this is our first year of producing this report, we aren't able to give a year-on-year comparison, but what you can see is a huge variation in numbers across the different functions, which was really interesting for us. Two notable functions in terms of being highly subscribed we saw were finance and engineering, which actually make up more than 50% of the total number of applications in our data set. This suggests some really probably very busy recruitment teams in those sectors, and potentially some room for a new approach. So, especially when you're looking around kind of that self-selection element of processes, being able to reduce that higher volume can really, really help. So in contrast to those high numbers, we're seeing much lower application rates and arguably possibly a more efficient selection process for the customer services sector. So that actually makes up 20% of the overall hiring volumes, but only 4% of the applicants. So it raises the question, does having fewer entry requirements mean businesses don't need to cast their net as wide in those sorts of areas as in comparison to the likes of engineering and manufacturing?
Carolyn, I'm so sorry to jump in, but it might just be me where I can only see the poll screen.
Oh, okay. Oh, let me close.
Might need to close the poll. There we go.
Hopefully. There we go. Okay. Sorry, no idea how that works. Okay, perfect. So you can see obviously the data now. So I'll carry on. Obviously we've spoke about kind of the engineering and the manufacturing sectors. and then also with the kind of the customer services, which are showing a huge percentage in terms of the makeup of the overall hires, but their percentage of applications are lower. So just around that kind of, I guess, efficiency of processes and things like that could be looked at for those numbers. So as we look forward through the lens of the current climate and the expected recession, we certainly know that in previous downturns, future talent programs typically receive an increase in applications per vacancy. So we've actually seen an increase in as much as 40 to 60% in the last downturn from the global financial crisis. But it's really worth noting that the picture isn't quite as clear for apprenticeships. So with employers not only competing with each other, but they also have to compete with higher education. So we looked at the UCAS data following previous recession in 2009. It showed a 7.8% increase in applications for university places. So we think that it's likely that students who may have previously chosen to leave school may decide to stay on for sixth form. It's further exacerbated by the fact that this year's students won't have qualifications anchored in an endpoint necessarily, so they might wish to stay on and gain a further qualification to compensate for that. So as a result, organisations will need to really work as hard as ever to not only secure the top talent in the selection process, but beyond the point of acceptance to really limit the impact of reneged offers. So it's working hard not just at the front end, but once you get that point after the offer, that onboarding stage is going to be really, really important. So just moving on to the media sources. So we've been reporting for years, as long as we've been doing insights reports on the sources used by graduate employers. But obviously this is the first time we've been able to really have a detailed look at how apprentice recruiters find their talent. So it's worth again noting here that we've combined all of the major government-backed or run websites to form the gov.uk media source. So that is a combination of lots of different sources. But what we've made, what has been clear in our research is that these routes are certainly working for applicants. So that makes up just over 10% of the total, which is actually quite significantly higher than the next highest source, which is Google. So unsurprisingly, following closely behind that is for applications is friends and family, and equally unsurprising is that this category sits at the top for hires. But looking at that, with almost 16% of hires coming from just under 6% of applications, there could be a suggestion that this is a more this more traditional approach to hiring apprentices prevails in this space. One thing we'd like to say at this point, though, is that the reliance on this sort of source of candidates could have an effect on your candidate pool from a perspective of diversity. So it was always kind of worth bearing that in mind. You know, you do run the risk of the kind of the hiring the like for like and reducing your diverse population. So, you know, with such a high percentage of hires coming from a lower percentage of applications, it may be a case of not what you know, but who you know. Just moving on, so looking at not going to uni, they delivered a strong performance with just under 5% of applications resulting in 6.7% of hires. But one of the things we found really interesting, though, was the strong performance of Facebook. So it's actually in contrast to its performance for graduate hires. So on our Future Talent Insights survey, it accounted for just 0.73% of applications and only 2.2% of hires. So they've kind of done really well in this apprentice market. Again, looking towards what the landscape might look like, it's crucial that those applicants who do choose to apply for your programs accept offers made to them because they truly want to work for your company, so rather than just because they simply want a job. So it's really understandable at this stage that the organisations, given the climate, might be looking to reduce spending in areas like marketing. So it's just about making sure whatever your chosen route to attraction is, it's imperative that you concentrate on things like your career site, your engagement materials, your assessment materials and processes properly, so that you can really articulate your career proposition at every stage for candidates. So we just wanted to then move on to looking at the conversion ratios of those applicants to hires. So as with all our reports on application to hire ratios, what we find really interesting to be and really compelling is actually the conversion ratios. So here we see actually Monster is in at the top spot with just 7 applications per hire. What we did want to say at the moment that Monster only provided 0.05% of applications. So we think this is probably going to be an anomaly. What we found a little bit more convincing though was the performance from Total Jobs. So 11.5 applications to 1 really reflects their performance on the previous tables in terms of kind of overall numbers of hires. Other online services fared quite well as well. So as expected, we did want to make a special mention of the careers service though. So this is often a really underfunded and under-resourced area, but it really returned a respectable 6th place. So they have a conversion of 2.2% of hires from just 1% of applications. So that's quite a good source there. And potentially, when you're looking at things being tight in terms of budget, they can actually be a really great source for you. So again, sort of looking towards what the landscape might look like during the coming downturn, it's really critical that those applicants who do choose to apply to your programs, again, accept those offers made to them because they want to work there. So just using this insight to kind of help look at what your attraction markets are doing, what's going to be the most effective, and where you can really get your employer proposition visible and known to the candidates. So we just wanted to move on then to our equal opportunities data. So when the Apprentice Levy was launched in 2017, one of the clear aims of the initiative was to drive diversity, so giving access to professional careers, education and development to all. And there were many further initiatives introduced to help support this agenda, which was brilliant. So with a combination of what was a really clear focus from the government and a really genuine commitment from businesses, it was really clear that diversity has been and will absolutely continue to be one of the foremost issues for organisations. As this was the first apprenticeship report that we've done, we'll be using this data as a baseline and we'll be continuing to track with quite a bit of interest in the progress of our future reports. So just looking at kind of gender, we've been really championing equal opportunities for many years at Amberjack, and with each year we're absolutely seeing organisations take steps towards really true equality. There are times where it feels like sometimes that for every step forward there are a couple of steps back, but we're really delighted to see some of the results from this year's data. There can sometimes be a perception that apprenticeships are more manual focused and therefore male dominated, but our stats actually show what we think is a really illuminating story for us. We do recognise that there are more applicants by a margin of almost 3 to 1, but what this does mean is that candidates, female candidates, are not necessarily being disadvantaged. So we're looking at applications making up just over 26% for females. But when we're looking at the percentage of hires, that's making up 34%, which is actually a really, really great headline to see. What was also really encouraging to see was that although, admittedly it's a very modest number, the percentage of hires for candidates declaring themselves something other than male or female was nearly double that of the percentage of applications. So candidates are doing well. They're also feeling a little bit more comfortable in being able to, mark down that they are kind of falling into that other category rather than prefer not to state, which is what we've seen previously. We're absolutely by no means underplaying the disproportion in the applicants from males, but we absolutely know that needs to be addressed. But for now, we're really happy to see that the data shows an applicant's gender really doesn't appear to play any part in how successful their application is. So just moving on to ethnicity. So we had a really great strong start with gender, but we're coming back down to earth with a little bit of a bump with ethnicity. So we're actually really disappointed to see that the only group of candidates who improved their percentage from application to hire were white. Whilst Asian candidates fared okay with only a marginal drop, Black candidates seem to have had the highest level of disadvantage in this space, with nearly 244 applications needed for every hire, against an average of just under 58 applicants needed from white candidates. So when we released our first insights for graduate hires in 2013, we really saw a similar picture, but we've seen a vast improvement in this year's report. So we know what can be achieved, but we by no means underestimate how challenging it can be. In a lot of aspects that we're seeing, the apprenticeship market is a number of years behind the graduate market. So, you know, we will absolutely continue to work hard with our clients and certainly the wider market to effect change. And we really look forward to hopefully seeing an improvement in the years to come. So just moving on to disability, we have a relatively small sample size for candidates who do declare that they have a disability. So it is difficult to draw kind of concrete conclusions about the state of the market for disabled applicants. But certainly for those that did declare they have a disability, they appear to have performed less well than those that declared that they didn't. Whilst the comparison between conversion ratios might appear sort of quite stark, the application percentage sitting at sort of just 3.14%, which, you know, actually isn't that dissimilar from the total that we saw in our graduate report of 2.97%. We're aware that some minor variations can easily skew the figures. So, you know, we're looking forward certainly to next year, hopefully with what we'll see is a larger data set. Again, this being the first year, we'll continue to monitor this over the coming years. So one of the things we also wanted to look at was the graduate market in terms of geographical distribution. So we know the graduate market's been very London-centric for a lot of years, with ambitious graduates seeking out the excitement and prestige of the capital. But we've seen some really gradual change with lots of larger professional firms and the likes of, you know, BBC and Channel 4 moving their headquarters away from London. I mean, the fact still remains about graduates that the market is still very biased towards London. What we have noticed though, is that the apprentice market is really different, which we think is principally down to few apprentices being able to really afford the high cost of, you know, things like accommodation and transport in London. It's also the case that many employers limit access to regional roles according to proximity. For example, you know, the need to live within 10 miles of the location of the role, which means many candidates are either excluded from attraction efforts or not allowed to apply. So we thought it'd be really interesting to look in some detail where employers are recruiting and certainly where the majority of role functions are located. So we do go into more depth in our report, but for the purposes of today, I'll just say, you know, in terms of the regions that we've chosen, they have been aligned with according to the government statistical grouping. So just for kind of ease and consistency, this is how we've split up the country. So you can see the total breakdown of all hires across the UK by percentage, in contrast to what we really might expect in the graduate market. London actually only made up around 18% of hires. It's the North East certainly that takes the prize for the highest concentration of hires. We know that the North East certainly has a rich history of industrial heritage, but looking at kind of more recent economic decline, we think it's going to be really interesting to see kind of what types of roles make up these hires. So we collected the data of the distribution of roles by function. So again, you know, when you have a look at the report, you can have spend a little bit of time looking at the figures in a little bit more depth. But what the table really shows us is the distribution of role types across the regions, exactly as we've kind of split up. But we'll start with the North East. It showed the biggest overall volumes of apprenticeship hires nationally, Quite clearly, this is significantly affected by the huge number of customer services roles. So almost 56% of the total were hired in the Northeast, and really reflects a buoyant call centre industry in the region. Encouragingly, also in the Northeast, the regional distribution by function accounted for nearly 16% of engineering roles. So that was the highest percentage recorded for engineering. That suggests that the traditional engineering base of the region is in good health. And evidence of hires across 6 of the 9 functions represented suggests a bit more of a broad spread of available careers for school leavers, which is really, really good to see. So when we look at the east of England and Greater London regions, they hired the most role types. So they actually hired 8 out of the 9 different role types. The east of England led the way, certainly in sales and marketing and science roles. Greater London saw the highest concentration of business admin and management roles at just over 34%, but also probably a little bit unsurprisingly, they also had the highest percentage of finance roles as well. The East Midlands performed quite strongly for customer services and for technician roles, but was quite limited actually in some of the other functions. And the Northwest showed a reasonably broad spread of role types. But what was most intriguing, certainly about the Northwest region, is its strong performance in all of the functions in which it was represented. So finally, onto sort of the Southeast region, it was potentially, as you might expect, it showed a broad spread of roles and some of the strong percentages across the board. And then the West Midlands offered a real range as well. So they sort of were spread across project management, sales and marketing, and science roles. So they all received sort of or achieved probably a significant representation across there. So hopefully this will kind of help with your, I guess, benchmarking, and when you're looking at where your attraction efforts can be made, understanding what other organisations are recruiting for in your particular areas can really help understand what your competition might be and what people are applying to in those particular regions. So I just wanted to run a second poll just before we move on to the next section. Let me just launch that. So this should be quite quick to do, so just a yes or no. We really just wanted to understand a little bit about kind of whether or not you thought that this or the numbers that you've seen so far kind of really reflected what you're seeing or have seen over the last year or couple of years in your recruitment. So I'll just we're currently sitting at around about 70% of you sort of say yes. The difficulty of a webinar is that we can't hear from those of you that say no and understand about kind of what those differences are looking at. But it seems to be increasing. So we're currently sitting at about 80% are saying that yes, those are similar to what you're seeing, which is really great to see in terms of the accuracy of the data. Again, as I mentioned, it'd be really interesting for those of you who are saying that it doesn't to hear from you and see how that's differentiated. So I'll just move on, and now I know to close the poll, so you can all see my screen again. So if we just move on to part 2, so just a little reminder, so the information in part 2 is actually gained as a result of a survey, so completed not just by our own clients, but also by non-clients. Again, the data was captured pre-COVID-19, but we will look at it through a lens of kind of the likely effect of the crisis on future trends. We know that most employers look to school leavers as sort of a talent supply for apprenticeships, but at Amberjack, we've sort of been speaking to employers really for quite a while now about the prospect of the 100-year life and the inevitable increase in automation, which you hopefully all agree that the current crisis has really fast-tracked the use of technology for a lot of organisations. So we also know that with the increase in automation, this represents, a great opportunity to certainly recycle talent. So not just necessarily looking at school leavers, but also potentially somebody who's been trained in one area can absolutely be retrained in a different area that could take them in an entirely different direction. So you have those people that are already invested and kind of in terms of company culture and things like that, they're already there. It's just about looking at reskilling those people in your organisation. So certainly with the likelihood of high numbers of really capable individuals facing unemployment over the course of the coming downturn, and a lot of cases through no fault of their own, it's a really good time to look at spreading the net more widely in search of top apprentice talent. So not just at school leavers. We absolutely encourage recruiters to consider the benefits of including individuals with greater life experience. So career changes can offer absolutely all of the potential of school leavers, but potentially without the need for pastoral overheads, and certainly sometimes accompany the demographic of school leavers. So let's have a look at the actual data itself. So looking into kind of the data insights, we wanted to start off with looking at hiring volume variations. So we took some data over kind of the last couple of years, and looking at what the demand was versus sort of previous years. We know that in 2018 there was a lower demand on apprenticeship requirements than in the year previous, which was when the levy was launched. We saw a slight increase in 2019, but then for 2020 we saw a really, really big increase. So it's important to note here that whilst participants in our research all hired different volumes of apprentices, we actually looked at the average variation year on year to kind of look at how demand has changed over those time periods. We looked at sort of at the time of running the survey, 55.5% of participants expected demand to increase. We also, obviously, as I've mentioned, sort of took this data previous to the COVID-19 crisis. So what we did was we, in a partnership with the ISE, we kind of looked at their data, and we know that the March edition of the ISE survey on the effects of COVID-19, around 36% of respondents said that they anticipated their hiring numbers for non-graduates to remain as planned, which was actually really, really encouraging. We know that almost 20% think that they might see a slight decrease, and just over 3% think that they would see a substantial increase. But I think, overall that picture looked really, really good. The ISE have they've closed and they're in the process of reporting another pulse survey, which was from April. So it'll be interesting to see what data comes from that, and to see if things are looking any different based on those numbers. It has to be said that with nearly 40% said that they didn't know what the likely impact of COVID-19 would be. I think it's going to be very interesting to see. We are remaining positive that demand will continue to increase based on data from previous downturns. So we know that organisations will be increasingly reluctant to write off their levy contributions without return. Hiring apprentices can be seen as a relatively low-cost way to build their future talent. So, and we also know that it's a way to bring lower cost capacity to replace attrition at more senior levels. So I think certainly from what we've seen in previous downturns and what our expectations are and the people that we've been speaking to, we're hoping that the apprentice sector won't be as impacted as what potentially the experienced hire sector will be. So we wanted to have a look at a various different range of things. So we surveyed our respondents to look at apprenticeship levels. What I wanted to ask here, and this will be our third and final poll for the day, is I just wanted to ask what level of apprenticeships form the majority of your programs. So if I start that. So we're looking actually really good. So we're currently on about 42% of degree form the main, I guess, group. 40 or 36% are sitting at level 4. 26% are at advanced, with nobody hiring for the intermediate or level 2, which actually is surprising, or sort of, I guess, contradicts the information that we've surveyed from our contributors. So really interesting to see that, actually. But certainly in line with what we've seen, those degree level apprenticeships are the higher percentage, sitting at 42%. Okay, lovely. I'll just move on from that then. So thanks, guys, for contributing to that. So just, yeah, as you can see on the apprenticeship levels, we found certainly a considerable amount of variation in all our participating organisations in terms of the levels of apprenticeship offered, but the most popular were level 2 and the degree apprentices, which certainly, given degree apprenticeships didn't exist before 2017, we think this is a really major shift. There's still discussion, certainly at an official level, as to whether degree apprenticeships are addressing the problem they were designed to solve. But those organisations that we run with that we work with that do run them, they've absolutely universally reported a positive experience in their programmes. So most found that degree apprentices were at least the same calibre as graduates, and in some cases were actually more committed to their work and training. So it's a really good news story for those degree level apprenticeships. We next wanted to kind of take a quick look at organisations and how they're hiring their apprentices. So prior to the introduction of the levy, with full government funding for training and hires being managed by training providers, most organisations were prepared to kind of risk having an ill-fitting apprentice rather than necessarily investing time and effort in ensuring they onboarded the best talent. So now, however, you know, certainly with funds coming from the levy pots managed by employers, and those employers being able to have a greater say in both the content and the quality of apprenticeship standards, we've seen employers certainly now seeing apprenticeships as more strategically important, and are taking more ownership to ensure the best possible hires. So as you can see here, you know, nearly half of participating organisations now run and manage their own recruitment processes for apprentices. And absolutely, with what we're seeing is an increase in the utilisation of the levy, we think that this trend will absolutely continue. So what's great about that is you know, we're seeing the quality of apprentice coming through, you know, non-traditional routes, such as the kind of the apprentice providers. The quality can be a lot better, I guess, monitored by the organisations themselves. The candidate experience can be vastly improved, and candidates then get the ability to be able to really see your employer proposition and look at your values and really get that buy-in. So that really helps, particularly moving forward in a market where you're needing candidates to be really bought into your organisation and really wanting to work with you, rather than it just being a job or an opportunity that's presented itself to them. So just moving a little bit forward onto looking at levy utilisation. So this has been something that you know, has been, I guess, a hot topic for a little while. You know, we can absolutely share a really pleasing story when it comes to levy utilisation. Over a third of our participants are managing to use all of their levy pot, which is brilliant. What was equally, you know, happy to see is that 85% were using 50% or more, which again is really great to see, and it certainly tells a better story than what we have seen over the last couple of years. We know that there's some level of disappointment around the uptake of apprenticeships, and it certainly looks like the levies managed to kind of focus the attention of those organisations who have got payroll of more than 3 million, and they're able to really focus on what this previously overlooked and valuable talent pool really is. So I think over the coming years we'll be able to see more and more utilisation of that levy, which will be great to see. So we saw that Apprentice Insights Part 1 was based on actual data from across the Amjac client base. It shows that apprenticeship programs are really popular and absolutely attracting, you know, on average about 75 applications per hire. But in the survey, we asked respondents to put down how many applications they received, and so we've banded this information for kind of, I guess, to help you guys look at that from a benchmarking perspective and see if that sort of sits around what your expectations are. So certainly, as mentioned in the introduction, these figures are not necessarily a reliable predictor of applicant volumes for 2021, given sort of what the change in economic conditions are looking to be. But they should absolutely still serve as a good benchmark to compare against your results, looking sort of backwards to 2019 and 2020, just to see kind of what the markets are expecting to see for that volume of hires. So one of the questions that many of our clients ask is absolutely, when does everyone open and close? So interestingly, we found that all of our participating organisations opened and closed kind of around the same time, really. So opening for applications between August and October, and closing for applications sort of between January and March time, and then running their final assessment stages sort of starting kind of October and December time, and then they're all kind of wrapped up sort of between March and May. So what we do see, certainly in terms of running the attraction and the selection processes, is that there can be a tension between the apprentice hiring, you know, in that it makes sense to follow the academic year, but resources are quite often stretched with having to recruit both, you know, across both graduate and apprentices at the same time. So that does mean that sometimes organisations will kind of bump apprentices to a time that's not necessarily ideal. You know, ideally, absolutely everyone, you know, organisations would open for applications in October or early November and close sort of just after National Apprentice Week, which tends to be around kind of the February time. But we know with limited resource, it's not always necessarily possible to kind of complete the processes that you need within those timelines. So, you know, what we recommend and certainly encourage is the use of outsourced support to certainly manage the kind of the higher volume activities. So things like telephone or video interview screening, and they can be done across both apprentice and graduate campaigns. So that can absolutely help your teams to kind of manage those two processes at once, which allows you to be able to deliver them in what is, you know, a really ideal time to be doing them. We also absolutely recommend technology. It can be a huge help in managing this. So, you know, it helps to improve efficiency and enables recruiters to invest their time really where they can add true value. So, allowing, I guess, technology and potentially outsourced support to kind of do the heavy lifting for you, so that your time and energy is really spent on some of those key areas of engaging with your candidates. We also wanted to kind of look at the apprentice recruitment processes. So what's that looking like at the moment? For this section, we asked participants which assessment tools they currently use to select apprentices. So in our experience, organisations who recruit via training providers typically stick to more traditional processes with a CV and cover letter, followed by telephone interview, and then final stage face-to-face interview or assessment centre. And we know that those organisations that are running their own processes now tend to include sort of more modern tools that are proven to deliver better candidate experience and also allow organisations to better bring to life their proposition, as I mentioned earlier. We also know that these types of assessments have higher predictive qualities as well. The processes we're talking about, you know, often include technology-enabled sifts, tools like an SJT, or for those of you who joined us last week when we launched our new HypoI tool, you know, those are particularly good for this population. So where you're looking to assess potential over past experience, it's so important for this group of candidates. We're also seeing more use of coaching calls prior to assessment centres. So as a non-assessed element, you know, that stage can offer the extra support that apprentices often need in preparing for what can sometimes be a really daunting and unfamiliar experience. So as well as incorporating the all-important sort of human touch element there, which we know is really, really key for candidates. So when we looked at withdrawal rates, we weren't surprised to see that high levels of withdrawals happen at the earlier stages. certainly before candidates are really fully committed or bought in. What we were surprised to see, and probably a little bit concerned really, was that there was actually a high level of withdrawals for assessment centres when compared to the final stage face-to-face interviews. We think that potentially the level of unfamiliarity surrounding assessment centres could be a contributing factor for this. It's really important to say here at the moment, though, by no means are we suggesting that assessment centres should be replaced with face-to-face interviews and that face-to-face interviews are better. It's actually quite the opposite. Assessment centres, we know, are much more predictively effective and certainly offer an opportunity for candidates to experience a more realistic job preview. What we suggest here is that organisations, maintain their assessment centres, but potentially invest in a little bit more effort in helping candidates to feel prepared and confident for the experience. So, as I mentioned earlier, so looking at coaching calls potentially. Looking at, again, resource, if we're looking at financial or resource restrictions, then if you don't have that resource to carry out those one-to-one calls, there are other activities, looking at online candidate chats, delivering comprehensive supporting materials. They can also be really, really effective as well. So it's just about how you prepare those candidates for those assessment centres, trying to make it as least daunting as possible. So looking at what organisations are assessing, we now know that organisations, we know now that we know how organisations are recruiting, we wanted to look at what it is they're assessing for. So we know that numeracy and technical knowledge are both really likely to be predominantly role specific, but we would also, we'd always expect to see, certainly communication, motivation, values alignment, and those sorts of things as well. What we thought was really interesting to see actually was the resilience and problem solving featuring alongside those in being important. So Amberjack, we're really passionate, certainly that within this population, organisations should be assessing also for grit, which includes resilience, things like applied intellect, which would also include your numeracy and technical knowledge, things like creativity, so things like your problem solving, which is great. But what was actually quite interesting to us was, particularly in what is now quite a digital age, the employers didn't really seem to be focusing yet on kind of looking at digital IQ in their hiring process. So we kind of thought it was quite interesting knowing how the world is moving forward. But absolutely, potentially with the prospect of working practices changing and certainly relying more heavily on technology, we'll see a change in next year's results. So we'll keep an eye on that. We wanted to mention at this point that certainly if you'd like to evaluate whether your hiring profile is optimal, we're happy to provide a free initial consultation and make recommendations on a no obligation basis. So kind of feel free to get in touch with us if you like. So one of the really good news stories that came out of our survey was around offer and retention rates, with our participating organisations reporting that fewer than 15% of their offers are declined. So that was a great news story to see. We think it's really encouraging to see as well that the retention rates, certainly sit with the 98% and 95% as well for retention. So given that apprentices are usually a lower cost resource and that the cost of their training is covered by levy funds, it absolutely adds support to apprentices being a great talent pool that is worthy of being focused on. So just moving on to the effectiveness of apprentice recruitment. So we asked our organisations to kind of rank the parts of the processes that they felt were kind of most effective. So 1 being considered excellent and 6 being poor. What we found was interesting was that many organisations felt that there's pretty, plenty of room for improvement when it comes to efficiency. And given the inevitable downturn and the likelihood increase that teams will be asked to do more with less, it's really a key area to focus on. So looking at automating, So looking at automating sometimes the more commoditized tasks and saving the investment of human effort for the tasks that generate the most return can be really, really worthwhile for focusing your attention on. So just moving on to our recommendations overall. So, looking at sort of a lot of information that we've gone through in what is quite a short space of time, I wanted to kind of just finish off with a high-level overview of what some of our recommendations are. So you'll certainly be able to see a full list of these in our report, but here's a brief summary. So looking at assessing for potential. So as we've mentioned several times today, it's really, really important for this group of candidates to be assessing for potential over past experience. So of all the early talent groups, this one is the least likely to have experience to draw upon. So there's often little to draw from asking them about what they've done previously. Also, as mentioned previously, efficiency in the post-COVID-19 world of work will be increasingly important, and this can be easily achieved by leveraging technology. So looking at something like an ATS, which is not only a great way to manage applications, but when using platforms such as, like Ambertrack, we use it quite often as an assessment platform. It can really dramatically improve both the candidate experience, but also the recruiter experience. So it can also help to drive candidate engagement through a centralized account area, and also really for the business, it can provide meaningful and data-rich reporting. So that can really help inform data-led decisions moving forward. We talk about investing in the right tech. Efficiencies can also be achieved with the introduction of SJTs, which certainly in an ideal world are bespoke. Or perhaps looking at a blended assessment that really hones in on potential. As I mentioned before, Amberjack's brand new assessment, HypoI, kind of brings in lots of different elements of cognitive ability and situational judgment and self-reflection as well. So for candidates at this level, it can be a really, really great tool to use. Whilst organisations have been reluctant to certainly introduce things like video interviews for apprentices in the past, I think feedback hasn't been great for this type of assessment. We know that when done right, they can be a really, really excellent way to not just save time, but certainly the cost that comes and is associated with the amount of time it can take to do telephone interviews. But it can also offer a key way to show off your employer proposition through the use of pre-recorded video introductions and real-life scenarios as well. So it's not just a case of translating and getting somebody to ask the question that might have been text. It's about really creating more of an immersive experience for candidates, showing real-life scenarios that they might come across. And that can be really, really helpful, certainly in this age where we're just not sure when candidates are going to be able to go back to doing face-to-face. It can give them those real life and immersive experiences. So we want to say, so we certainly love it when we hear that organisations have introduced coaching calls prior to assessment centres, and we absolutely can't recommend them highly enough. But it's really important that the great candidate experience doesn't stop there. So looking at underpinning your assessment centres with a candidate-facing digital assessment centre platform can really help to deliver a realistic job preview for candidates. So as well as that, it can really improve efficiencies. We've seen clients who use our digital platform save up to 96% in admin time. So it can really help when looking at those efficiencies as well. So as we move forward, it's absolutely also important that the delivery assessment centres remains agile. So looking at kind of what the world of work might be like over the coming 6, 12, 18, 24 months. We don't know if there's going to be another lockdown or possibly another reason that might prevent candidates from travelling in the future. I know it was only a few years ago we had the ash cloud that caused severe disruption as well. So the ability to be able to easily switch between both face-to-face and virtual assessment centre delivery is really vital. So finally, we just wanted to kind of look at the diversity and fair assessment things. From that side of it, it's really, really important to make sure that you look at the nature of your assessment. So understanding what it is you're trying to assess and the best way to be able to deliver that. looking at how easy you make it for your candidates when it comes to reasonable adjustments. So thinking of those candidates from that diversity perspective, are they able to not only just easily contact you, but are your processes set up and geared towards those candidates that may require those adjustments? And then looking at the tests that may have some adverse impact. So understanding, we know certainly that the more traditional cognitive behavioural test can show some adverse impact, but when changing to things like SJTs and things like that, we know that they have can have zero adverse impact. So are really, really good tools to use. I'm just going to quickly, I've just realised that the time, we're kind of running out of it. We've gone through a lot today, but just to kind of cover off a little bit about kind of what the ISE does. So for those of you in the space, I'm sure you're very well aware of the ISE, and I'm sure many of you are members. For those of you who aren't, they do some really, really, really great work in the early talent space. They have multiple surveys and multiple reports that they've published. They were published inside Student Recruitment for 2019. They did a student development survey, so not just the recruitment side of things, but also the development survey side of things, sort of past hire. They also recently released a COVID-19 report, which was for March. What they are doing at the moment is also, I think they've finalised the survey and are compiling the research from April. So I think it'll be really, really interesting to see what has come of that. And then, you know, if you are interested in seeing any of the support or the research or anything like that the ISE do, then absolutely, you know, get in touch. There's a lot of data that can be used from their research, which is great. So I will take any questions and I'll go through at the moment. So, okay, let me have a look. Okay, oh gosh, okay, we've got a lot of questions to go through. Okay. Okay, quite a few were telling me back from when I forgot to take the poll off the screen, so you couldn't see the screen, so apologies for that. Lovely. So there doesn't seem to be any questions at the moment. The hires data for friends and family be about who you are? Okay, so one question. Would the hires data for friends and family be about who you know referrals, or would it be about, for example, parents influence apprentice candidates? So the friends and family are your kind of your recommendation. So if you've referred somebody to join the organisation, so that's how they've come to know about the role, for example. I've got another question as well. When looking at when to recruit, are different industries showing different timeframes, or is it just down to the choice of the employer? So I think that it was pretty similar across all of the industries that we had a look at. I think, you know, we have had a relatively small data set to choose from. So I think over the coming years, we'll be able to expand on that and look in a little bit more detail around that. But certainly, I think it doesn't tend to vary too much in terms of when we're seeing people sort of start and finish their programs or their recruitment processes across industries. I think that kind of might need to be it for the day. As I mentioned earlier, if you do want to get in touch with us, we can absolutely answer any further questions that you might have. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really, really, really great. I hope you found it useful. Yeah, thanks once again for joining us.